From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joel Mitchell. How are you today, Joel?
I'm doing okay, Jason. We're both joining from the comfort of our homes today, so no fancy-looking studio in our backgrounds.
No, embracing the work from anywhere, though, including podcasting, which is really great that technology allows us to do that. Now, we are recording just after Mother's Day in Australia. So did you get spoilt for Mother's Day yesterday?
I've got that sort of collection or growing collection of the Lego Botanicals on my desk. So it was sort of a similar theme in that it was kind of a plant, but it was the Harry Potter Mandrake Lego set. So it kind of looks like a plant in a pot, but then it pulls out and turns into a little like tree man homunculus thing. It's pretty cool.
Okay, is it a Lego thing or is it?
It's a Lego Harry Potter thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you spent yesterday assembling that?
I did, yes, I did, and I assembled that. You know what? I rewatched Clueless, that movie from the 90s, which I don't think I've seen since the 90s. It was good. I enjoyed it, and I didn't realize I didn't realize how subversive it was for the time, at the time. So, yeah, some cool stuff in there.
Yeah, okay. And Paul Rudd was in there, wasn't he?
He was. That was like his big opportunity, I think. And then he did Romeo and Juliet after that.
Yeah. And he hasn't aged a bit, right, since that movie?
Yes, 50-something-year-old Paul Rudd looks just the same as 20-something-year-old Paul Rudd.
Yeah. No, it was a classic movie back in the time, and I'm glad it holds up. I might have to watch it with my kids. Is it appropriate for my kids?
Oh, there's some drugs and some talk about sex, so that's your call as to whether you think that's appropriate or not.
Okay, I'll play it by ear. Cool. Well, look, our guest isn't here to talk about movies. He's here to share some of the work that he's been working on, so we should probably introduce him in.
Yep.
Okay. So his research focuses on wellbeing and happiness from an interdisciplinary perspective, especially applications in public policy. He has just published his first book for a popular audience called Beyond Happy, combining scientific findings, folk and theological wisdom, and insights from the arts. He is Associate Professor of Public Policy at the University of Warwick. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Mark Fabian.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. Clueless is, in fact, just debuted as a musical in London, so it's very topical, even on this side of the earth.
There you go, Joel. Time for you to travel.
Time for me to go to London, yep. We've got enough clients there for you to fund me a trip to London, Jason.
Our clients can maybe fund you to go over there. We'll talk to them about that. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
Mark, what are your favourite podcasts?
I do run my own podcast, but I don't think it's for a general audience. It's basically junior academics talking about their research. So I try to get people on who are making sense of new phenomena like social media and that sort of thing. But there's all sorts of stuff on there. The most recent guest is doing qualitative research around infidelity and how that's changing with polyamory and these kind of new trends.
You know what, Mark? Can you tell us the name of that? Because we've definitely got a hardcore nerdy base of listeners who would definitely be down for listening to any of those, I'm sure.
It's got a very hardcore nerdy name. It's called apodstomology, like epistemology.
I love it.
Quite like Accidental Gods, which is a bit sort of lost in the woo. Like it's got a lot of episodes about sort of regenerative farming and psychedelics and this kind of stuff. But I quite like it because it's a very meta-modern show. So it's very sort of earnest and sincere, and it's trying to think of new ways that we could be in the world, new ways that we could organize society. And sometimes it can have a very strong sort of hippie vibe to it, which is maybe a bit too strong for me, but I still think they're covering a lot of themes that you don't get in too many other places. And maybe similarly, I quite like, it's discontinued now, but there was a podcast called Smoke Hole Sessions, which was basically, I'm actually forgetting his name right now, but this guy who used to kind of live in a tent in the UK and is now a sort of Orthodox Christian mystic, just talking about all the different bits of wisdom that are in various mythologies, but he's sort of documented in a scholarly way all sorts of lost mythologies and fairy tales, particularly from across the British Isles. And he's a masterful storyteller. And I quite like listening to the way he puts forward a lot of these old stories and really draws out lots of little bits of wisdom from what are usually very short little tales. So I can recommend those three.
Very cool. I don't think we've heard of any of those ones before.
Great.
So good work. And can you tell us, please, about your professional career?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I won't give you the whole background, like how I came to be where I am. I used to be a tennis coach, actually, and now I'm a professor, so a bit of a journey to get here. But nowadays, I work on public policy, mostly, and mostly well-being public policy. And the way I think of that is that the sort of paradigms that we've used to organize ourselves for the last 50 years, at least in the OECD, so things like the welfare state coming out of World War II, then the neoliberal welfare state from the 1980s onwards, they're just sort of a bit played out. And similarly, culturally, I think the kind of materialism that we've had over the last 50, 60 years also seems to be quite played out. Certainly the younger generations seem to want a lot more things like meaning and that sort of stuff. Not just more money, a bigger house, whatever it might be. And we need new ways of organizing governance to meet the challenges that we face in the 21st century and kind of instantiate the new values that we have. And I work on that sort of thing. And a lot of it's quite, I would say, dry. Like, I think a lot of what people don't maybe appreciate about public policy is that much of it comes down to like human resources, paperwork systems, the way contracts are written, that sort of stuff. People think a lot in terms of like carbon taxes or, really big policies. But a lot of why we have bad outcomes at the moment is just because of the way we do commissioning and procurement. And so a lot of my research is in these kind of areas.
Well, as a former public servant and regulator, I can certainly understand the importance of public policy and appreciate that work that you're doing.
Thanks.
So obviously you've written for academic audiences before, but this first book that you've written for more of a popular audience called Beyond Happy, it is just, I guess we are recording this before it is available in Australia, but it will be available in Australia for purchase after this, and we'll put a link in the show notes for sure so people can be directed to that if they're interested. But I guess, first of all, what motivated you to write it?
Yeah, so I guess like a lot of people who work on happiness and well-being, it's all started with depression. So kind of my late teens, end of high school, I got quite depressed. And I think most of my depression stemmed more from nihilism rather than kind of mental health issues. So I didn't know what it meant to be a good person, what it meant to do good things with your life and in your career. And I didn't really feel like there were a lot of good answers coming to me from my culture or my communities. And I went to try to find some of these answers and I really struggled. So I think over the next few years at uni, there was some good stuff in, I would say, existential philosophy. There was some good stuff in psychology, but it was all kind of scattered all over the place. And there wasn't really one place you could go to find the answers. And if there was one place to go, it was often a very arcane sort of philosophical text written in the 50s or something, not something that was especially accessible. So at that time, I already had started kind of writing this book when I was like 23 or something, but it was very focused on these nihilistic themes. And then I've started to make this more my kind of professional interest over the next 15, 20 years. And one thing that was bothering me about the happiness and well-being literature was that it, as I said, was all scattered, so it needed to be brought into one place. And as with a lot of academic fields, people were just arguing with each other. And it seemed to me like actually a lot of positions that were presented as contradictory were in fact highly compatible. It's just that there wasn't any, people didn't have an interest in figuring out how to make these things mutually compatible and coherent, because you can make more progress in your career by arguing with someone. So I tried to take a different approach and just integrate as much as I could. So all these people are talking about well-being and happiness in different ways. How can we bring that all into one kind of theory that makes sense of all that and explains how it fits together? And that's basically, I hope, what this book is. So drawing on all sorts of different branches of science, but then also, as you said in your intro, thank you, folk wisdom, theology, philosophy, all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, there definitely does need to be someone who brings together these not so disparate but differing views, right, into one place. Because as you say, academics are incentivized not to agree with each other. And just as recently as this morning, I was having a conversation with one academic who were talking about, I guess, academics in the workplace mental health space, how, you know, a lot of them just will not get along. They'll get along as friends and peers, but they'll just disagree with each other's point of views and not take each other's opinions on board, even though they're all very intelligent people. And if they collaborated, they might come up with something better. They all want to have their distinct views and keep separate, I guess, in the literature.
Yeah, that's right. And I think especially if they start moving into consulting, where it then becomes quite important that you like build a brand and you build a sort of niche, then again, it becomes useful to say, well, my thing is this, and I don't really like those people because they talk about whatever. I think within our little groups here in the UK and Europe, we are quite collaborative. And even when we disagree with each other, we tend to keep that relatively private. And then when we're speaking publicly, it's more of a unified front, because I think we all agree that there's progress to be made and we're all doing like good work in some ways. So whoever's getting airtime right now, just signal boost them.
Yeah, I don't think these stoushes are very public. It'd be great, actually, to take some of these private stoushes and bring them out into the public. I think our listeners would have a great time eating the popcorn and watching on, I think.
Yeah, it would certainly be entertaining. There's actually another sort of nerdy podcast in this space called Researching Happy with a guy in Adelaide, Matthew Azaleo, and he wants to run a series at the moment of different people working on happiness and well-being, arguing with each other. But in the spirit of like empathetic collaboration, or what do we call adversarial collaboration is what we also call it. So yeah, I think there's some momentum for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I did get that feedback early on in our podcast that we should have more people with like contradictory ideas, but we end up just getting people that kind of sing from the same hymn book as what we do. So it's hard to have that conflict on the podcast when we're all in agreement.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah.
All right, so Mark, let's get into some of the key themes in your book. So the first one that we were going to explore was how to self-actualize.
Mm-hmm. So I've got my own theory of this that's clobbered together from a bunch of different literatures on the topic. So some of it's coming out of like Maslow and Carl Rogers's work, and then that sort of evolved within psychology into self-determination theory. The most basic building block for me is self-discrepancy theory, which was, I think, originally developed as a way of thinking about depression and anxiety, but I think it's quite useful as a building block for a self-actualization theory. So what I mean by self-actualization, maybe I should start with that, is how you become the person you would like to be, or how you become the person that you're proud of being, that you feel comfortable being, you're happy in your own skin, you're contented with your life, this kind of stuff. And I think that is both a process of self-discovery, where you need to think about what sort of dispositions you might have, what talents you have and how you can use them, what things you just really don't like doing. A lot of that is innate, but what's innate to you is quite minimal. So even if you think, I really like exercising or something like that, if you really liked exercising in the 17th century, there's no way you could have become a tennis player. Whereas nowadays, that's much more available to you, and you've got to then discover how to manifest this innate self that you have, and that then begins this process of self-creation. And so here I think is where self-discrepancy comes in. So you want to think about who you would ideally like to be. That's what we call the ideal self, and then who you feel a responsibility to be, and that's your ought self. Then you have finally your actual self, which is who you are now. And you've got to try to be as honest and authentic as you can about all three of these self-constructs. And then you try to bring them into alignment. So you think about how to bring your actual self into alignment with who you would ideally like to be. And so let's take I tend to take really ambitious examples, not because I think people need to be ambitious, like quite the opposite, but they're just easier to explain. So if you think about a young woman who wants to be an astronaut, what kind of behaviors are associated with being an astronaut? Well, you've got to be quite fit, and you've probably got to be really good at science. So you might then enroll in science classes, and you might go and join a gymnastics club or something like that. Once you've started to embark on these activities, then you're going to get feedback from those activities. So there's going to be two kinds of feedback. Some of it's going to be affective. That's like motivational, emotional moods that are associated with these activities. And there's a lot of information in that. Some of it's going to be social. So the people in the club are going to give you certain kinds of vibes. They might encourage you. They might be really irritating people, whatever it might be. And once you get this feedback, then you want to introspect on that feedback and think about what sort of message it's sending you. So if all the feedback is positive, if you love going to the gymnastics club, you like doing pull-ups, you like tumbling, everyone there is really lovely and encouraging, and you're like, these are my people, this is where I belong, then you just invest more in that. So as long as the feedback is positive, you can keep investing until the point where that investment is getting so extreme that now it's starting to affect other things you care about, and then you're going to have to harmonize there. If, on the other hand, the feedback is kind of negative, then you might need to make adjustments. So it might be the case that you find that you like exercise, it's just not gymnastics that you like, and then maybe you want to swap to something different. It might be that you really like gymnastics, but you don't like the people in the club, so now you've got to swap to a different gymnastics club. It might be really mixed and complicated in some way, and then you've got to tease apart some of that complexity. So part of the book is helping you to understand these varieties of emotional and motivational signals and what sort of messages they can send you. But basically the idea is that you gradually calibrate your actual ideal and or self until the things that you're doing in your life and the balance of things that you've got in there is such that you don't feel like investing more anywhere, because that would mean taking away investment from something else that you value. And that's when you know you've kind of arrived and you're in a good spot.
That's probably the most comprehensive explanation of the process of self-actualizing that I've heard, Mark. Well done.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So how does that then work? Like, so say, for example, I want to be a successful founder of a technology business, and I also want to be a good dad and husband. Can you self-actualize in different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a section in the book actually drawing on a body of literature on multiple selves. And I think there's particularly two psychologists, I think they're based in California, who work on this, Showers and Ziegler-Hill. And they have a very similar example to the one you just gave. So they use this kind of hypothetical of the super dad. And the super dad wants to be a hard-charging corporate behemoth, but they also have kids. And if they brought that corporate persona home, then they just scare their kids, and then they'd get negative emotional feedback from that, and that wouldn't go well. But similarly, if they took their kind of kind, nurturing dad persona into the workplace, then maybe they wouldn't be able to handle the stress there, or they wouldn't be able to make the tough decisions or whatever it might be. And the kind of simple solution in this case is just to contextualize those different aspects of your identity. So some parts of you are going to manifest more effectively or valuably or beneficially in certain contexts, and other parts of you are going to manifest elsewhere. And you want to think about how core these different things are to yourself, and then where you can express them. And it might be the case that you just don't have an opportunity to express something and you need to let it go. And that might be quite painful. Life is hard sometimes. But I think the first step to kind of balancing these sorts of multiple selves is to think about this contextualization and try to interrogate what it is that you value about these different aspects of your personality. Who else values these things about you, or in what communities can these aspects of you be beneficial? And then how can you locate them in those specific places rather than making them general to your life? I'll give you one maybe simple example of this that came up in a recent conversation where someone was telling me that they have a friend who's just really autonomous. Like they think they're always the same person in every circumstance. And I think there are people like that, but often they're not responding to social feedback effectively. people are telling them that you're a bit of an asshole in some particular context, and like, nah, that's just me, that's my authentic self. And I'm like, well, that's problematic then, isn't it? So I think you probably want to be interrogating that to some depth as well.
Yeah, no, interesting. Now it's good to hear, because I know, like, if I didn't have kids and I wasn't married, I think my just, being a business owner and building a business, that could easily just dominate every waking hour of my life.
You would just have a swag at the office, Jason, and that would be your life.
It'd be so easy, Joel. It'd be so easy. It could be, right? And I get a lot of enjoyment, fulfillment from what I do, right? And but I guess I really have to balance those two, and so you want to be good at both. But like you say, it's about that contextualizing and thinking about I think it is possible to optimize in both areas. Actually, I shouldn't say optimize. I want to. That's actually the next question, because you talk in your book a bit about the difference between self-actualization and self-optimization. So I'd love to know how you differentiate between those two terms.
Yeah, sure. So I think self-optimization is sort of the bread and butter of the like influencer communities, is like how to be your best self, but your best self is defined very sort of generically in terms of being better, being sexier, benching more at the gym, realizing your potential, these kind of vibes. And I think that can be very beneficial in a lot of cases, as long as you know to what end you're trying to be better. Otherwise, you can just get caught in this quite exhaustive insecurity loop where you think, oh, I need to have six-pack abs in order to be valued by society or something like that. And that's not the case. So the difference for me between self-actualization and self-optimization is twofold. Self-optimization is about being better in general, as opposed to a better version of yourself. And then self-actualization, and this is the second point, is about being the best version of yourself, which is the self that you feel most authentic in, the most comfort with. And that might not be optimal, in the sense that you might not be the most jacked person at the gym. You might not have the best garden on the street, or whatever it is that you feel a need to be the best on. It's more that you've figured out what kind of balance of things you want in your life. And in that regard, you're not lazy about becoming the person you're most comfortable being. But the person you're most comfortable being might be lazy. It might be someone who has a lot of it might be someone who's really, that might be because you want to be available for your friends if they need you to like drop in and help them out or whatever. But as long as you're really honest with yourself about what it is that you're trying to construct in your life, then go after that. And I think then you can turn to the self-help literature, and there might be all sorts of tips. But I think the self-help literature commercially wants as big a market as it can possibly have. And that means providing these generic tips rather than things that are specific to individual people.
Yeah, no, I like that differentiation. So that optimization, like you say, very general kind of just getting better. And it's probably more externally driven by, I guess, consumer culture and social media more than necessarily your authentic self, which is more around the actualization.
That's right. And there's this really important, I think, literature in self-determination theory here on extrinsic pursuits. So the extrinsic pursuits are power, status, fame, popularity, money. And the reason why they're extrinsic is because they're not peculiar to you in some way. And the reason why they're problematic, or why they can be toxic, is because they're poor substitutes for your basic psychological needs. So our basic psychological needs are for autonomy, so to feel volitional in our life and doing the things that we want to be doing, not controlled by somebody else. Competence, which is that we feel skillful at the things that we feel some need to be competent at. Again, not something that we're told that we need to be competent at, but something that comes out of us organically. And then relatedness, which is the feeling of being loved and cared for and generally having social support. And I think what happens in extrinsic pursuits is that you're looking for compensation for a lack of these basic needs, but you go for these poor substitutes. So instead of autonomy, because your parents were overly controlling or something, you look for power. Joelle, you mentioned that you used to be a bureaucrat, so you would have come across maybe these petty tyrants, or like the kind of people that work in border force, who have bad relationships with authority figures growing up, like their teachers or whatever it might be, and then they want some power as an adult. So they go and work in these roles where they can say no to people in really authoritative ways as compensation for that thwarted autonomy. And similarly, if you're trying to be popular on TikTok or social media or whatever it might be, that's a poor substitute for feeling actually loved and cared for. And the people that are fond of you on social media, as soon as you're not popular, as soon as you don't offer something to them, they're going to leave. It's a very instrumental relationship, and that actually makes you nervous. That makes you defensive. You're worried about abandonment. Whereas if you were pursuing genuine relationships where you did feel loved and cared for, then you wouldn't be stressed in that way, and it would actually be better for you in terms of your mental health.
So insecure attachment with your social media followers.
Yeah, that's a good way of summarizing it. Yeah.
So can we, obviously our podcast is really focused on the intersection of work and mental health. So, something that's often really strongly connected with good mental health at work is having a sense of meaning or purpose through the work that you're doing. So could we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe it's worth just summarizing where we're at scientifically with meaning and purpose. So I think there was a lot of philosophical interest in it in the 50s. That's kind of what existentialism was all about. It was kind of a lot of our traditional sources of meaning and purpose, like religion, the family, nationalism, this kind of stuff had all disintegrated a bit. That's why we had this big vacuum that fascism and totalitarianism then came into. And so a lot of philosophers got interested in these themes. And then over the course of maybe the early 2000s, science started to kind of codify this stuff fairly effectively. So there's now this 3-factor model of meaning in life that says there's sort of 3 aspects to it. One is that a sense of significance, that you feel like what you're doing is worth doing. A sense of coherence, which is that the world makes sense. And then the final one is something like that the world is enchanted, or it feels like that you have a kind of palpable experience of meaning. It's not just made up. So you've got purpose, significance, coherence. And I think these things are all things that we can get from work, not necessarily from work, but I think a lot of us do derive this from our workplaces, and that's really great. Like I think my academic work, this is something that I get there. I feel like I'm contributing to the world from what I'm doing. I get up every day and I have motivation because I feel like I have purpose. And in all my seeking and researching, I feel like I'm making better sense of the world. And I think a lot of people get this from other sorts of workplaces, but the danger, I think, in terms of a psychological health and safety podcast, is that some managers will cynically exploit this. So they know that you want a sense of meaning, you want a sense of feeling loved and cared for, or a sense of belonging. And so they'll do kind of cheap tricks to try to get you to feel like the job is your family, or the company is your family, to feel like you're making a difference to the world when actually you're just like, I don't know, lining private equity pockets or whatever it might be. It's not to say that all private equity firms are bad, but, there's some bad apples out there. And I think that's, again, if you have gone through a bit more of a process of self-actualization, you know your values and you know your personality and you know why you're doing something, then you're, in a sense, inoculated against that kind of cynical exploitation.
Yeah, I think something that we see that is, I guess, a risk factor for a lot of people is where their work is, I guess they perceive it as a calling, and so they will work to the point of hurting themselves because they think about the consequences of what if I don't keep working, and what are going to be the impacts on the people that I'm helping through the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think a related aspect of that is, in a sense, like getting addicted to meaning. So you're worried that if you take time off work and just sort of engage in leisure or something like that, that it's all going to fall apart. And in a sense, you've kind of convinced yourself that you matter a lot, and that you can't take any time out. And I think it's very confronting to realize that you don't matter that much. Like, actually, if you took time out, then everything would keep rolling and you could come back into it refreshed and make a better contribution. And you also then tend to neglect other parts of your life, like your relationships, for example, your community, your neighbors, that sort of thing, because you're so like driving on your track. And I find this to be quite a common feature of a lot of the world's capitals. Like, I live in London now, and it's definitely the case that a lot of people come here with this sort of restless energy to do big things. But it also means that everyone in London is just zoned in on their individual struggles, and there's very little solidarity in London as a result, because people don't have this cognitive capacity to think about how other people are doing and how they can do things together.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life?
then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So I guess another topic in your book that is related to the workplace, or could be, is talking about a sense of belonging. So I'm interested to know what you write about in the book regarding where that sense of belonging actually comes from.
Yeah, so it's not, I don't think I think about it strictly in terms of the workplace. The main things that I talk about, but they can certainly apply to the workplace, is first emotional intelligence. There's just a simple section in the book on this technique of when you come across someone who's having some big feelings, and that might be you, just ask them or yourself, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? And maybe hugging in the workplace, I don't know what the kind of HR peculiarities are around that. But in any case, the idea is that sometimes people do want you to help them solve their problem. But other times, if someone actually just wants to vent or wants a hug and you try to solve their problem, you'll come across as like impatient and callous, and not like ready to listen and feel with them. So I think it's worth developing some emotional intelligence in general, and I can certainly see how that would help in the workplace. The second piece then is that I think we need priests, and I don't mean in the sort of religious sense, I mean people who are aware of themselves as nodes in a social network. And that's definitely the case at the workplace. And I think the key part of the priest as a social technology is that they're embedded in a community. So when the priest offers advice in the mode of a therapist, they do it knowing all your social networks. So they can put you in touch with someone else in the community who can help you with your particular problem. Whereas a therapist really only knows you one-on-one. And I think in the context of a workplace, this sort of conception of ourselves where we have a function to play in connecting other people to each other can be super powerful in having a multiplier effect in terms of, well, I helped this person heal by putting them in touch with this other person, and now that other person can also leverage that relationship in beneficial ways. And this then leads to what I call karmic culture, which is where instead of having like a customer service relationship with someone where you care for them because they pay you money to care for them, which I think is pretty toxic, but also instead of having a reciprocal relationship with someone where you're a good team because I help you when you need help and you help me when I need help, and it's a kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours situation. What we want in a karmic culture is just that I help you when I have capacity to do so with no real expectation of reward. And then because I want to live in the kind of world, or I want to work in the kind of firm where down the track, if I need help, someone will be around to offer it to me. And I think this creates a much more psychologically safe work environment if people feel like they are part of a community of people that look after each other, that are all working towards some kind of common purpose.
So, yeah, I guess we hear many organisations talk about, loneliness and people can be at work and lonely, and they're trying to give people a greater sense of belonging. And sometimes, it's pushed by people and culture, HR, management. How can you spot if management or the organisation is cynically or earnestly promoting these themes?
Yeah, tough topic. I mean, I can only really speak from my experience in universities and a little bit from the scientific literature. So maybe there's two things worth mentioning here. So I think one is that people who are interested earnestly and in a humane sense for caring for people will be less bureaucratic, in the sense that I find that there's a lot of people who just want to follow procedure. And of course, procedures can be important. We need structures, we need rules, this kind of thing. But there is a case where perhaps just as people get accustomed to it, they fall back on procedures in circumstances where the people involved really need a human connection. And in the universities where you're dealing with students, and we have this like massive mental health epidemic at the moment among young people, this kind of legalistic approach to how we deal with people is super callous, or at least it's experienced as very callous. And the idea that we are treating you fairly because we're applying the rules is not what people want to hear. What they want to hear is that you have understood their peculiar situation, you recognize them as a human with an individual problem, and you've tried to figure something out that is within the confines of the rules, but is particular to them. So I think having this kind of reaction where you have a balance of the procedures that have been developed, hopefully to make things better, also taking care of people in their peculiarity is really important. And then from the scientific literature, I think it's quite useful to be aware of the like dark triad of personality traits. So Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathology. So psychopaths tend to be not genuinely empathetic. They can sort of read your emotions, but they don't necessarily feel them. They don't have a kind of connection with you and your feelings. And they will tend to then use that emotional intelligence in a mercenary way to kind of extract from people what they need. That then spills into their Machiavellian behaviors, which is this kind of plot, plan, and prepare sort of personality where people are always playing some kind of political game. And there again, the idea is not that they're involved with you in a collective endeavor, but that they have their own agenda. And insofar as they can exploit a collective endeavor to get ahead in their own agenda, they will do so. And then, so what if I've got psychopathy, Machiavellian behavior, and then narcissism? So I found this a very powerful definition of narcissism. So most people do what self-verification theory calls self-verification. So you check with other people whether you are in fact the person you believe yourself to be. Do people perceive me the way I perceive myself to be? Narcissists don't do that. Narcissists only interact with people to check whether they perceive the narcissist the way the narcissist wants to be perceived. And they will constantly be trying to construct this social image of themselves rather than trying to verify their true self as with other people. And I think narcissists are very dangerous. All three of these personality types are very dangerous. When you get them all together in one person, then that's especially concerning. And I think we could generally do a better job of making people aware of these personality types.
Yeah, and we did that, didn't we, Joelle? We had a whole podcast episode on the dark triad.
We did, yeah. In the workplace specifically, yep. But maybe let's talk about, instead of dangerous character traits, maybe some underappreciated character traits in the workplace. And the one that I always think of is introversion, because we know that extroverts just tend to get rated better for job interviews. They're more likely to get promoted.
And rightfully so, Joelle.
I always remember I was facilitating this workshop, and I was talking about the introverted, extroverted, and what are the differences. And I said, extroverts will think while they're talking, and introverts will think first and then talk. And this just absolutely blew this one woman's mind. And she would have been probably in her late 40s, so had a good long working history, and it had just never occurred to her that if there were people at the table who weren't talking, it wasn't because they didn't have anything to say, and she didn't need to jump in and start filling the silence. So that was informative for me at a fairly early stage in my career, because I am more on the introvert side of things. But what other underappreciated character traits should we be looking out for?
Well, can I just pick up on that introversion extroversion thing? Because I'm very interested in your guys' perspective. I sense that I'm talking a lot here, and I want it to also be conversational because I think I have a lot to learn about the workplace wellbeing side. One thing that really, I'm hardcore introvert. One thing that really strikes me about extroverts as well is that they like that social energy, so they'll often create it. So they'll say, do we need to do this? What are we up to, guys? This kind of stuff. Whereas to me as an introvert, that's sort of an intrusive distraction from me, like running my task or something like that. What kind of insights do you guys have for balancing introverts and extroverts in a workplace that I can go and take back to the uni?
Everyone works from home while Jason's in the office.
Yeah. Look, I do actually, like Jason's sort of tongue-in-cheek there, but I do think hybrid work models can actually be really positive, because for those people who are introverted, it means that they do actually, you know, they can construct a quiet workplace to do that focused work when they need to, or where they're feeling a bit sort of socially drained. And then, yeah, I guess extroverts can just still carry on doing things the way that they always do.
Yeah, just calling people on Teams when they see that they're available or not in the meeting.
All right, yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. Like, how do extroverts deal with kind of everything being on Slack channels and that sort of thing, rather than just dropping in with a cup of coffee or whatever?
Now you can drop in just with a Teams call, and because I'm the boss, they have to answer. So
That's all right.
It's good. Joel was laughing when you were talking about that, Mark. Like constructing, I guess, something social if it's not happening. It happens quite often in our workplace. So if I'm working from home like I am today, I usually say, hey, enjoy your extra productivity today, because you're not going to have as many distractions. I can't help it.
Jason's secondary title in the office is Chief Distraction Officer.
Yeah, but I'm living my authentic self.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think as long as we can become more aware of these different ways of being, so that we can. That's why I think the helped heard hug stuff is so powerful. Is that I think if you're kind of very rationally oriented person like myself, then just being aware that there are other things that people might need, other ways of interacting with them, can be quite transformative. And I think personality types is a bit like that.
We've got about a dozen psychs in our team, so it's pretty hard to not be told, I guess, or diagnosed. So what are some other underappreciated character traits?
Well, the one that I wanted to talk about is what I call being a low-stakes interaction person. So that there's a whole chapter in the book on different character traits like integrity and fallibilism and this kind of stuff. But the one that I don't see talked about much at all that I think is super powerful is being a low-stakes interaction person, and especially in the workplace. And basically what it means is that when people have to deal with you for some reason, it shouldn't be something they dread, or a burden, or feel like a chore or something like that. It should be very, not necessarily perfunctory, but just kind of like, I'll just send an email to whoever and it'll work out. And relatedly to that, I think especially when people have to interact with you in something that's a bit tense or a bit awkward, that's where being a low stakes interaction person is really key. So I think things like interpreting mistakes as incompetence or carelessness, or people being too much under the pump, and so they're making mistakes, rather than interpreting it as malice, and particularly not interpreting it as this person is out to get me, or just like everyone's failing at their job and I have to pick up the pieces. That's kind of becoming a high stakes interaction person, where whenever someone comes to you with a problem, it becomes a big deal. And then people are like, oh, I don't, please don't make me interact with that person. I feel a bit like that when I'm interacting with any of the kind of bureaucratic bastions in my organization, that anytime I send them an email, it's going to trigger this whole kind of legal process of like, oh, what are our obligations under this act or whatever? And I'm going to have to deal with that. What paperwork do I have to fill out? What committee am I going to need to go to? So it's not necessarily like a personality thing where I find that person difficult to deal with. It's just that it triggers this very big thing, and that becomes high stakes. So I think ways to make it easy and chill to interact with people is very beneficial. And the office manager for us is a very low stakes interaction person, and I love her and her team, and I buy them a hamper every year to say thank you, because they just take care of a bunch of stuff without me even needing to worry about it. And when I send them an email, often I'm quite vague because I don't know the processes they deal with, and they'll just be like, yeah, sure. And then when they email me back, they explain what's been done, so that then the next time I kind of know what's going on. And this office manager, I've seen her explaining on LinkedIn that her kind of philosophy of office management is that when everything's going really well, no one says anything. It's not that you get compliments, but also you don't get complaints. Everyone just assumes that things are always this well-oiled and smooth, but actually you're just doing a really good job and you should take pride in that. And I think that's also a low-stakes interaction person kind of attitude, is that people are happy with me. I don't need a pat on the back. I don't need constant reassurance, this kind of stuff.
I guess it's a framing of your competence as well, if we're talking about those intrinsic needs, where, you can see no feedback as actually good feedback, and demonstrating you're competent.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. At the same time, I mean, I don't want to be too strong on this idea that you shouldn't give feedback to people. So I had a boss, one of my early jobs, where we had to induct everyone into the team by saying that if this person is really happy with you, you won't hear anything from them. And I think that was a bit too much. Like that was kind of toxic. He felt like a bit of an absent manager. And I think he probably wasn't paying enough attention to the team as well. And I think if you're that sort of person, because that's a personality type, at least you can check in with people in a kind of routine way, where, I don't know, you have your quarterly performance review or something. And then it's important that in those settings, you at least demonstrate that you have been paying attention, and that you do care about these people and you are observing, you're just not getting in their way or something like that. And then if they say, I really need you to just send me a one-line thing saying great job or whatever after you've done something, and that's helpful too.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile managers being aware that their employees are going to be on a continuum, right, regarding how much feedback, that extrinsic kind of feedback that they need. Some will really need a lot of it, and others, they don't need it because, they can notice these things like your office manager that is giving her signals that she's doing her job well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds good.
The last topic from your book that we wanted to discuss that we thought might be useful, like particularly interesting for our audience, I think all of the stuff that you're talking about is really interesting, but was extrinsic pursuits and defense status signaling. Now, I got no idea what that means just by reading that out. So it'd be great for you to give us an explanation of what you talk about in the book on that topic.
Yeah, for sure. So just building on what I was kind of talking about earlier around pursuing power, status, fame, these kind of things, rather than trying to nourish your basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So those are the extrinsic pursuits, these things that they're not intrinsic to you in the sense that they're not peculiar to you. They're not about you as an individual, you and your self-actualization, you and the kinds of people that you care about. So it's not like strictly individual necessarily, but it's just very generic and very external to you. The reason why the relationship with defensive status signaling is, I did kind of start to get at this, so with the social media example. So when you get these extrinsic pursuits, you're actually successful in attaining power, you're successful in becoming popular or high status, you're successful in success as a version of competence. So it's not that there are particular skills that you really care about. It's more that there's like something that society says represents success and you get that, but it's not especially authentic to you. What can often happen in these kind of circumstances is that you've developed these instrumental relationships with people. So you're worried that the only reason why people respect you in your community is because you're a success according to like bourgeois norms or something. So like, I'm a dentist, that is a successful occupation. But you're really worried that the only reason why your neighbors respect you is because you're a dentist. And so if you had a catastrophe in your life, I don't know, your hands got injured or something and you couldn't be a dentist anymore, you're really paranoid that suddenly no one will respect you anymore. No one will be around caring for you. Similarly, if you think that you're popular because you generate a lot of TikTok content, and then you're worried that if you stop generating TikTok content, suddenly you'll have no friends, then you continue to generate TikTok content, but you're doing it defensively. You're doing it because you're worried about abandonment, betrayal, loneliness, these kind of things. It's really pernicious in my industry, academia, because we move to do our PhDs, we move to do our postdocs, we move again to do our tenure track positions. And so we completely shatter our social networks like multiple times at exactly those points in your life, like your mid-20s, your early 30s, when you really need to be super kind of putting your roots down and investing in those networks so they're really thick. And so we often arrive in new cities with no social network and we try to reach out and make friends. And so how do we do that? Well, we status signal all the things that make us a great academic. We're like, oh, I've published all these papers, I'm at this prestigious university, whatever it might be. But the people that you attract to yourself with those kind of behaviors are these people that are only interested in you instrumentally. So you need to try to engage in these intrinsic pursuits, things that are genuine to you, and then find people that you can connect with over that. And it might be quite subtle. Like in academia, I think if you're putting your papers out there because you want to connect with people who are interested in the same things, then that's a good kind of behavior. If you're putting them out there because you want to impress, and attract people who are impressed by that, then you're digging yourself a toxic hole. So I think this is kind of the key issue, is to think about when you signal, are you doing status signaling, or are you doing like character signaling, values signaling? And then are those signals coming from a defensive place? Are they actually about warding off these fears that you have? Or are they coming from a more earnest and sincere place about like, hey, I'm trying to connect with people who are interested in this kind of stuff? So it can be quite subtle, but very big and meaningful differences.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation, and some tips, I guess, on how to avoid that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think LinkedIn can be interesting because I think there's a lot of like backslapping behavior on LinkedIn where people sort of, if you tag a colleague who's done something really great because you genuinely think it's great and you want to share that with the world, I think that's excellent. You do come across people that tag their colleagues because they're trying to show that they're signal boosting their colleagues, so please do that for me when we come back round. That's a bit more toxic. And I think there's a lot of that kind of behavior that we need to be careful about.
Yeah, and I guess Instagram and other platforms as well, people are showing their best selves often and not showing their true self. Everyone's thrilled or proud on LinkedIn. Yeah,
it's hard because if you don't use those kind of words, then you just come across really like blando, and that's bad too. Because I suppose that's what I do. I just have these very like matter-of-fact posts, but I think that's also a bit sad. Like sometimes you do want to celebrate things that you've done, but at least make sure you have a tight personal network of people who you do know quite well and that you can celebrate things with, rather than trying to get your wider social network to celebrate things with you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, but when we do want to celebrate, Joel, we're going to have to come up with a new kind of term other than thrilled to use. I think that's been done to death.
Stoked,
yes. Publish the Australiana.
Yeah. This conference was really grouse. Yeah.
Heaps good. Yeah.
Heaps good. No, yeah.
Most of the ideas that I had involved swearing, so I'll not share those right now, probably. So, Mark, what changes would you love to see happen in workplaces as a result of your book?
I love this question.
If you're thinking grandly.
I suppose two things. So one is I'd like to see more B Corp type stuff. So not necessarily formally a B Corp, but a B Corp is basically an accreditation scheme for businesses that take seriously environmental, social, and governance outcomes, not just profit. And notoriously, ESG is very hard to measure, very hard to get kind of legal structures around. And I think that's, we need to keep working on that. But ultimately, it's a values thing. Like, if you genuinely care about ESG, then you'll just do it. And I would like to see more people who are values-led individuals and bring that into their firms, bring that into their workplaces, that sort of thing. Related to that, I would say that another thing I'd like to see is, and I'm going to phrase it oddly, but more people selling biscuits. And what I mean by that is that I think when we think about moral ambition or being a values-led person, we often think too grandiose. There's actually a book out right now called Moral Ambition, and it seems to have this kind of issue. And so we think, you need to pursue peace in the Middle East, or you need to create some brand new psychotherapy or something like that. There are so many things out in the world that people get value from, like biscuits, like a good cup of green tea, like a vacuum cleaner that really works and is easy to fix and has general parts. There are many ways that you can go into these kind of more germane, mundane things and just do them a little bit better, do them a little bit more ethically, like fixing the supply chain so that it's more environmentally sustainable. Or if you're working in developing countries and you get your company to scale, then the government might invite you to help them with their business environment. And instead of saying, please give me a monopoly, or instead of saying, please get rid of my competitors, or please allow me to exploit labor, or whatever it might be.
Like
you would
Elon Musk. Is that what is that you're referring to? Yeah.
Yeah, well, Peter Thiel in particular, the more kind of shadowy figure alongside Musk. So Peter Thiel has explicitly said that competition is for losers, and that what we want is a monopoly. And he's not wrong from a business point of view, but he's definitely wrong from a society point of view. And I would like people to be more aware of how they sit within these collectives. And in that regard, I think just being someone who's values-led, and then in these circumstances, you say things that are good for you, but are also good for everybody.
Yeah, and so, incremental change is also beneficial.
Yeah, and that's another I guess, an angle on it that so incremental change across all the many thousands and thousands of things that society does will generally make the world a better place. And there's a lovely quote from Henry Van Dyke, who was a British American writer and diplomat, where he says something like, use what talents you possess. The woods would be very silent if the only birds that sang there were those that sang best. And I think that's really powerful for a lot of people. Like, we can't all be amazing superstar whatevers, but we can all use the talents that we have in our particular spaces that we occupy to make those spaces better, and that will generally cascade out and make the world better.
See, Joel, just because you're the best singer in the office, you shouldn't tell me not to sing.
When did I tell you not to sing, Jason?
It's by the look that you give me, Joel. You say it with your eyes.
Well, I think what happened was I said, I'm leaving now. But that was unrelated. It was time of day.
Correlation, not causation. Yeah, whatever. Use that old chestnut. Mark, so obviously your work isn't specific to workplaces, but you do work in the wellbeing area. We ask this same question of all our guests, regardless though of where their work is focused. So what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
Maybe I'd flag two things here. So one is that I would hope that in the future more workers and labourers in that sense know why they are in an institution, know why they're in an organisation. So what values are they bringing to that organisation, or what values within that organisation do they appreciate? And it might not be that their whole life is committed to that firm. That might not be their calling or whatever. It might just be a way to make money. But I would like them to be aware of that. So just generally people living more examined lives and being aware of the place of work and the place of their workplaces in their lives, I think would be super beneficial. And then the second thing would be what we've talked about a bit is that all this knowledge that we have about how happiness, meaning, belonging make people more productive and make people want to invest more in their organizations don't get cynically exploited. And I think part of that is, again, the workers themselves being more aware of this science, why they are pursuing these things at the workplace, and that will hopefully inoculate them against more kind of cynical practices coming out of managers. And maybe in relation to that, I would like to see less managerialism in general. So less of this kind of idea that I, the manager with my spreadsheet, will just kind of figure out what would improve people's happiness without talking to them. And then kind of impose that lunchtime yoga, whatever it might be. What I would like to see instead in terms of workplace mental health is a more collaborative style of management. And that can be like, I don't mean a situation that's totally flat and there is no manager, because like teams need someone who makes decisions and takes responsibility and this kind of stuff. But just generally more of a sense that the manager is one of us and is hanging out with us, and we do more co-production in the workplace and these kind of things.
Yeah. All great, and again, fairly unique from what other people have shared, and that's because you're kind of unique in terms of who we've had on the podcast as well. I'm interested in that second one. I don't want to open up another can here because we are at the end of the podcast, but this whole idea of like engagement culture and driving engagement and trying to use all of these, like you say, exploitation of people's psychology to try and make them as productive as possible. For the benefit of the organisation, and not necessarily for the benefit of the people. So I'm not going to ask for a response. Look, I just wanted to put it out there.
You just wanted to be the smarty pants this
That's
episode.
probably a good example of exploitation. Leveraging people's innate needs, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And then particularly if it's not even for the organisation's benefit, but rather for the shareholders' benefit, because I think we do see, even on that side, like a lot of kind of asset stripping of firms. And one of those assets is the workers in those firms. So I think generally a gentler attitude to that sort of element of our political economy and some transformation on that front would be really valuable.
Yeah, and maybe this so-called engagement drop that companies are observing is because people are checking out of these things. They're becoming wiser, which is part of your hopes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what was it? The quiet quitting phenomenon and a lot of this stuff that came out of COVID. Yeah, I thought that was a positive sign, mostly.
All right, and last question for you today, Mark. What are your parting words of advice for professionals who are listening, who would want to work in the area of workplace wellbeing or psych health and safety?
This is such a great question. So I think something like this, like get your science from the scientists and your practical advice from practitioners. So I've intimated in this interview that I, as a scientist, don't really know that much about workplaces because I don't interact with them. And so when I want information on that, I will go to a practitioner, someone who spends a lot more time in workplaces. But equally then I see a lot of practitioners kind of getting the science and they often butchering the science. And the scientists will butcher the practical stuff. So make sure you know the difference between those two kinds of expertise. And I think what would be really lovely going forward is if we could blend them a bit more meaningfully on platforms like this podcast. So that's kind of my main piece of advice.
We do know some people who refer to themselves as pracademics. So they kind of, do a little bit of both and try to combine it in a useful way.
I did speak to a good friend of the podcast, Dr. Angela Martin, earlier today, and she did say that she's identified the same problem as you, Mark, and she wants to be the intermediary. So her company's name is actually Pracademia, but she wants to have a service where she helps companies to engage academics, but cut out all the extra stuff that academics want to layer on that is not practical or meaningful to the organisation. So
that sounds great.
You need someone who can speak the word, corporate talk and also academic talk, and then go, well, what do each need and how do they work together?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we kind of get this in reverse at the moment, like the commercial imperative of commercializing your science then just kind of encourages you to butcher it all the time and encourages you to kind of come up with buzzwords and generally make it sort of not quite what you said in your scientific research. Whereas what you're describing sounds much more like, let's get rid of the sort of guff and all the kind of technical extra bells and whistles and just carry the key thing through without packaging it up in ways that actually make it deceptive and sort of misleading.
Yeah, and the layperson often don't know what they can what is extra academic guff, as you call it, versus the stuff that's really important to include to ensure that that it works right, and the processes and interventions are are valid and reliable. So you need that person who can go, all right, back off, Betty. Like, we don't need this professor stuff like here. Like, yeah, this is what's your core stuff that this company should be taking on board, and how do they do that? So, we might have to get Ange. I did say that we should get her back on the podcast to talk about that because, like you flagged, Mark, it's needed. So maybe we have to get her on in the next episode after this one. It'll be a good segue.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thanks, Mark, for your for bringing that up. Good segue. So, Mark, thank you so much for the conversation today. I'm going to have a read of the book, and looking forward to seeing it in bookstores and on Amazon, no doubt. So we will put the link in the show notes because we're not going to release this until the book is available. I think it was a really fascinating discussion, some really unique insights, blending a lot of different backgrounds and different types of approaches to this issue of wellbeing. So kudos to you for putting out a popular book, and I hope it has a really good reception once it gets out there.
Well, thanks very much for having me on the show and helping me publicise it. I really like these questions. It was good to think about the workplace element. So, yeah, great times.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have our guests on, and you can catch those videos on the FlourishDX YouTube channel. We also take snippets, the best of the best bits of our conversations, and we put them on the FlourishDX LinkedIn page. While you're over there, if you want to continue the conversation, you can connect with Joelle and myself, and maybe even Mark, because that's how I connected with him as well, and he was quite responsive. So thanks again, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow FlourishDX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.